Your recent essays, Kingsley, are about biopower. Can you broaden up this subject?
Well, I'm not alone in thinking that biopower is coming to the fore as a very relevant concept and subject, especially this year with what's happening regarding health and health security. Biopower, the term, is generally known because of the work of the French philosopher Michel Foucault, who in the mid to late 70s talked about biopower in relationship to disciplinary societies. What he meant was that the state exercised power over bodies, especially through enclosed institutions such as the hospital, the asylum, the prison, factories, schools, or before that workhouses, places where the person could be disciplined through their body as well. And obviously in the hospitals and in the asylums, there was the focus on health. So there was the biopower over the body and also the health. Now, Foucault was specifically talking about the exercise of this power in the last few centuries and coming up to, let's say, the early 20th century, but not really further than that. But now in the 21st century, what we're seeing and what I'm looking at is how power over the body is no longer solely exercised through enclosed spaces or institutional spaces, but it actually is fluid through networks. And that power has gone from disciplinary societies to control societies. So fluid networks of control can be exercised over the body, even when the body is mobile. And that has also been looked at I think in the last 2 decades through researchers who've been looking at surveillance and control societies. But what's explicitly come to the fore in 2020, of course, with the pandemic and the virus and the lockdowns and the quarantine, is that how these emergency measures have heightened and accelerated the power that the governments and the nation states are exercising over the human body, to the point that they have control over human sovereignty. So, for example, the WHO declared back, I think in March, that they were considering, in necessary cases, of sending people into people's houses who were contagious and taking them away and quarantining them. And then we've seen, that was I think a bit of a shock announcement. But since then, we've seen indications where not only police, but let's say non-state actors who have been given the military status can actually go and take people out of their own sovereign space and quarantine them if they think that they are, what they say, at risk. They can separate people, they can stop people meeting now, obviously, and there's been lots of indications about that. So biopower now, I think, has entered a completely new phase. Not only is it completely in a fluid, control, almost seamless type of surveillance tech society, but because of the emergency measures have raised it to a degree whereby its power of infiltration into our sacred spaces, like our homes, places where we thought people, we were secure. Biopower is giving the state and the state apparatus and state and non-state actors the so-called legal right to go into the spaces and to take their power over the human body. So that's what I've been looking at recently in what I call the new reign of biopower, in order to separate it from the older way of looking at biopower through institutions.
And we haven't even yet started learning enough about our bodies and the potential that the human body is capable of. You were writing in your earlier books like Sacred Revival or Phoenix Generation about coming generations whom are going to possess heightened potentials. What are your thoughts about this Is this still going to happen, or are we doomed?
Oh, well, I hope we're not doomed, and I've always maintained a positive vision and perception of the human being and the human condition. The question is, we go through phases. We go, and long-term and short-term is relative, especially so now. But you said about hidden capacity of the human being. I think that's the main point, because I've focused a lot on the inner resources of the human being. Also the consciousness. The consciousness, as I've talked about, is it's a field, a consciousness field that operates, externally and within the human mind. It's a connective field that goes across tangible and intangible realms. And also, of course, I've looked at the psyche, how the human psyche has been influenced by external impacts and control measures. But what's interesting now is that human capacities are referred to the interior world. And what we're seeing is an increased intrusion of biopower in the interior world. Now, the older biopower was looking at docile bodies, passive bodies, how to manipulate bodies. It was between bodies. What we're seeing now is a shift inside the human body, intra-body. And we saw, this has been happening over the last few decades. It's been with the increased power of the pharmaceutical industry, the rise, especially since the 1990s with the Human Genome Project, and now with the ability to manipulate the interior of the body, genetic-wise, chemically-wise. So now the playing field is completely shifted, because the human resources for empowerment begin from an internal state. What is our psychological state? What mental, emotional state? What is our ability to utilize the power of consciousness and conscious intention? But now you see we're having this intervention with the chemical, genetic, biological, cellular makeup of the human body, and that can weaken the human body. And if we look now at the measures over the push to have testing, the push to have the virus testing, societies may enforce a clean body, which means we're clean interior with, what is that? What is the state of the virus inside the human body? So the body is now porous. What's the state of what's our body inside is just as, or more important, what is the exterior state, because the governing authoritative bodies want to know what is our interior state. Do we have the vaccines up to date? Will there be vaccines compelled for people to take them so their physical body can now move between certain exterior spaces? And I think that is the great problematique, is that biopower and biosecurity has shifted the playing field into an intra-body interior space, and that is going to be where we're going to see a relationship between human interior empowerment, the state of the human being, the human condition, and the power of intervention into that.
I would think that it is absurd if we think in terms of claiming freedom for our own bodies and the freedom to choose what we are doing with our bodies. But concerning what you are saying about this topic, biopower, it seems that we are rather getting too far away. How would you reflect on freedom during these times?
Well, I think these times are highlighting freedom to a point where it's never been really noticed before, how little freedom we have, and even in the so-called democratic free states. These are all being brought to light, which I think is important. And freedom has always been something that we've taken for granted, especially, again, like I say, in the democratic free states, because we've assumed we have freedom because we're able to move. We have certain freedoms, but I think the question you're pointing at is freedom with a capital F. The sovereignty, the human freedom of our sovereignty. So because we have certain freedoms to buy things we want, to visit countries with or without a visa, to choose our career within parameters. And so we believe we're free. But now we're seeing that there is control over the human being. And now, control previously was really freedom over the physical body. And, I've mentioned this before in my writings that, when like, say, the king or the sovereign head of the country wanted to have power over somebody, they could punish them and put them in a town square or, in stocks, or hang them, or give them a public humiliation. And that was a physical kind of power to give a message to people. And that would, kind of control people or regulate people, social management. Then that moved to we moved to a place where the power went from the sovereign state, or the kingly, queenly head of the state, went to governments. And so governments exercise power through certain laws, institutions, and also through what we would call propaganda, a way of trying to create a consensus for how people behaved within each social, cultural space. Now we're seeing a mix of that. Now the power is also through the mind, through the conditioning, through the propaganda, and back again over the body. So it's a kind of total regime of power. And so the freedom then, for example, before this year, I don't think any of us could have imagined that we would have our freedoms curtailed to such the degree that we would not, we'd be going to lockdown. We would not be able to leave the house except for essential, buying of food. We were not allowed to even go out to walk our dogs until they lessened the level of emergency. And then, for example, in this, where I am here, we were allowed to go 100 meters to walk the dogs. We were prison bound in our own homes. Nobody, I think, would have imagined before this year that there was a power over them that could, put them in the prison of their own homes. So I think this is an important point, is that now people are questioning what is the human sovereignty, because as I've just talked about, human sovereignty is supposed to be your rights over your independence and your human body. And now there's points where, what if a certain testing or certain vaccinations become semi-compulsory, or they're compulsory to go into certain mobilities or certain access of services, then what is your sovereign right? What is your freedom? And you can say, well, a governing body may say, well, if you don't accept those freedoms, move to another place. That's been a past argument. But what's happening now is that a lot of these regulations are becoming part of a kind of globalized consortium. And in most countries, they're regulated in similar ways, or they will be. I think this is more overarching global perspective on freedoms, rather than just, focused on a particular cultural, social setting. And so that really does point towards a big question of, for the human being in general, the human species, the human condition, what is our sovereign rights? And so I think, freedom with a capital F, not just freedoms, is going to be a central question for moving ahead post-2020.
Maybe not everything is yet set into stones, and since we discussed earlier that we are living in the transitioning times, how would you ideally envision the future?
Well, because everything is so fluid, everything is moving around, and it's not sure how it's going to resettle. And as I said before, that's also a positive thing, in that we can have participation in how we want to, recalibrate things and readjust. And also, many people have been woken up to the fact that, things aren't what they have always appeared to be, and that we have now to make a greater contribution in how we want to live our life and our reality. I think before, many people were, to use Foucault's phrase, docile bodies. We just assumed that we would live this life in a certain way, things would be arranged for us and life would be catered for us in a certain way, and then we get to the end of the path and boom. I think now we're realizing that things aren't so secure, aren't so fixed, and there is now a greater question of how do we want life to be, and we have to contribute into making that a reality. So the responsibility is more on people, and I think around the world people are gathering. They are evaluating, analyzing the regulations and thinking, do we agree with them? They want to have a say, and this is a major point: is that the future has to be based around a kind of agreement through communication, not just imposed from the state downwards. So whatever regulations are going to be trying to be put into place as the new consensus reality of the future, we as people have to say, is that what we agree to? Do we adhere to that? If no, then we have to make movements to place ourselves either to debate and dialogue against those regulations we don't agree with. And I think we're seeing people standing up now around the world against some regulations. And also people have to question their own priorities. What do I want to get out of life? What kind of quality of life do I want? And so it's a question of creating people in your community, in your networks, in your relationships. What do you want to get from life? And that is still very fluid. So I have hope that can go in a positive direction still.
So after this busy year, which was also very busy for Beautiful Treater Books, publishing all the many books that you are writing or making videos, how would you shortly end? What words would you use to end this year, 2020, which hopefully is also going to be a transition into a better year?
Well, I would say that it's time to accelerate the networks and relationships of people creating their own domains. Now, for example, with the creation of Beautiful Treater Books, I mean, it was set up in 2012 just as to publish one or two private books of mine, but I've developed it as an alternative route to publishing because of the difficulty and the restrictions of mainstream publishing. But I think what we're seeing now is a growth in, let's say, the artisan cottage industry of people creating their own, home industries. And music-wise, we see a lot more musicians going through Bandcamp, going through their own, sharing, distributing their music. There's been a huge increase of people moving to, let's say, Patreon sites and having their own groups where they interact with and can be more sustainable. The plan with Beautiful Treater Books is to publish more books through solely Beautiful Treater, so we can publish what we want, when we want, how we want, and to grow our communication and our relationship with our readers, so we don't have to depend on this overarching grander system. And I think that's the way to go for many people. The future, I think, is that we should consider how to create our own artisan industries between ourselves, not only communicate, but do our commercial interest between ourselves, have our relationships with the buyer, the seller, and not to be dependable on this greater, increasingly non-sustainable industry. So I think that's going to be accelerated because of what's happening now. Also because more people are forced to work from locations like home, forced to do more work digitally. But I think the positive side of that is that we now need to put more focus and energy into working through our own networks.
Thank you, Kingsley. And now I'm just wishing you a beautiful end of this year, and let's hope that the next year will start smoother.
Mm-hmm. Let's all get ready for post-2020 and everything that will be forced to bring out the greatest of the human condition in the times to come.
And for the readers and viewers, thank you for watching and keeping up with us.